All right, buddy, it's nice and simple. Okay, all I need you to do is you just look at the camera and say, greetings and welcome to the new and improved Beyond Fluency podcast with Liam and Rams. Simple. You want to give it a try?
Easy as pie. Okay, I think I can do that.
Okay. All right, get on your mark in the middle for me then, please, buddy.
Okay.
That's it. We'll adjust the camera. That's it. There we go. Camera's ready. In your own time, action.
Greetings and welcome to the new and improved Beyond Fluency podcast with Liam and Rams.
Okay, and cut. Right, let's have a quick chat.
Okay.
All right. That was good. It was good. Okay, if you are Dr. Spock.
Pop culture reference.
What was that?
I don't know.
Maybe we'll find out later. Yeah. Okay, so this time, a little bit more energy. Maybe smile a little bit more.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Smile.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
All right. Okay, on your mark. All right, let's find the spot.
Smile.
Okay, camera is ready.
Happy.
Ramps, when you're ready, action.
Happy. Greetings and welcome to the Beyond Fluency podcast with Liam and Rams.
And cut. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, good, mate. Really good. Well done. We're going to work on it. We'll work on it as the season goes, all right?
Okay.
Don't worry. Good. Welcome to the show.
Today, we're diving into the power of presence from mindful to magnetic and everything in between. We have a plethora of new features to share with you today.
Like Guess the Idiom, a game show style picture quiz.
We've hit the streets of Milan for Say the Word, challenging non-native speakers with difficult pronunciation words.
Pop culture reference looks more closely at language originating from popular media that has become idiomatic within their own right. This week, we look at Star Trek and Mr. Spock.
Finally, an active listening exercise for you to pay attention to, collocations with the word presence.
We've left a little logo hint for each one, so keep your eyes peeled for when you spot the collocation. Stick around to the end for all the answers. Presence.
Presence.
Yeah.
It's got a nice melodic sound to it, don't you think? Presence.
Yeah, presence.
It's a word that you can play with. You can say it in the normal way, presence, or presence, right? There's a, like we've spoken in previous podcasts, there's, once you understand the language, then you can start to play with it.
I agree. There's a lot we can play with from intonation or maybe word stress point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also even just words that sound similar. Like, of course, we could say something like, well, I hope that my presence is a bit of a present to you today.
Exactly.
Right? Like
yes.
the sound of it being so close to each other. So that's one of the things that I thought when I was thinking presence and present. Right?
Yes, to be present or to give to someone a present. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So what does presence mean to you?
Well, I've got my notes here with me. So it's a little bit easier to answer your question. Very convenient that you asked me a question that I completely prepared for.
Nice.
So when it comes to presence, I think we can maybe divide presence into three parts, right? Mm-hmm. Physical presence.
Okay. Yep.
That's one.
Actually being somewhere.
Exactly.
Like
we are
physically present at our desks at the moment.
Yes, we are. That's the first one. It's the obvious one, I think, as well.
Hmm.
Then the second one is charismatic presence.
Charismatic presence. Yeah.
Right? So I'm sure you've come across these kind of people where they walk into the room and you feel their presence before you actually hear them speak or anything of that sort, right?
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think that would be sort of like the charismatic presence,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're the type of people that you want to go and speak to. They seem like they have
A
an
magnet.
energy. Yeah, exactly. They have gravitas.
Yes,
Gravitas.
right. Yeah, you
That's
just
a
grab.
great word. I love gravitas.
I love it in this context as well because
Gravitas.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And you just find yourself gravitating towards them, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And that is probably the definition of gravitas.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, those are the two that come to mind. But what about you?
Okay. Well, I
Right.
mean, presence. The obvious one for me is mindful presence. Right.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
um, being in a state of presence is being in the moment, experiencing everything as it happens, not having our minds thinking about the future or the past, but actually being where we are,
Being centered in the
being
moment. I feel
centered.
when you
Grounded
said
is another word that is nice.
exactly
Yeah.
right. As soon as you said mental presence, I instantly heard in my mind, um, you know,
Yep.
um,
Exactly. Tibetan monks practicing
ting.
meditation for hours on end. Yeah.
Yeah.
This
But
that kind of presence.
how does all of this presence, how does this we've spoken about three types of presence now so far. We've spoken about
Hmm.
physical presence, then we've mentioned mental presence and charismatic presence. How does this all fit into language learning?
I think they're all skills. I think they're all things that you can practice and learn and use to be more confident, more likely to engage in your environment in one way. I think if you can develop the skill of presence, whether that be physical, charismatic, or mindful, it allows you to be in a room, to be in a moment, to make connections with people. And I think all of those things are very important for language learners, especially if you're looking at the business environment.
I agree with everything that you said. The first thing that came to mind when you talked about mental presence from a language learning point of view is when someone didn't understand a word. I can see how, mental presence comes in handy there. Like, okay,
Hmm. Oh yeah,
hum,
because
let it
like
go.
this spiraling out of control in your brain because you
Exactly.
didn't understand one word
One
from a whole
word,
sentence,
exactly.
right?
So
So yeah, you know,
you cease to be present in that moment. Right?
exactly, exactly, and mindful presence helps you to slow that feeling down and just go, it's okay, move on, carry on, listen to the context,
It's like the
understand.
Tibetan monks.
Right,
Exactly. Hum.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, and things like meditation, yoga, tai chi have been well documented to help slow that inner critic down. And it's not about stopping thinking, it's about slowing thinking down and managing your thoughts. So allowing things to pass and just being able to carry on with what you're doing. I think that's a common misconception is people think, oh, meditation, I've got to sit here and not think about anything for 30 minutes. No, it's a process. You're going to be thinking stuff, but it's just about allowing the thoughts to pass and not getting stuck on things. And that is an incredibly important skill for listening comprehension.
So we can see how it factors into when things go pear-shaped, if you will, right?
Mm,
That's someone using a word that you didn't understand, maybe encountering a particular accent for the first time. The accents are funny like that. More often than not, you struggle with the accent that you're less exposed to. We've seen
right.
this countless times.
Mm-hmm.
Clients who are exposed to the American accent typically have difficulties when it comes to the English accents. And of course, there
Hello.
are many different English accents as well. For a very small island, there are just quite a huge range of accents that you get
Oh,
from
yeah.
England,
Yeah.
and then vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then another one with mental presence is when maybe that could affect with language learning is when people are involved. Maybe this goes a little bit beyond the language in meetings that they feel like they shouldn't be there to begin with. It's a
Right.
difficult one to
Yeah.
come to terms with, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. But we have a good meditation, guided visualization for that, which we'll leave a link for up there. We covered that very subject of feeling like you belong in the room. a guided visualization can help you with that. It gets you into the right mindset to be able to cope with that kind of situation. What do you think about physical presence? What kind of subjects come up with this?
The first thing that comes to mind is public speaking, and
Right.
more specifically presentations, especially when they are in person. Because I think when they're online, there's a bit of room for, I don't know, flexibility, and people feel a little bit more at ease, because at times you have the screen there. I've got clients all the time telling me, I'll have my speech written on the other monitor. There are one or two things that you can work around the fact that you're very nervous. You can rehearse it over and over again.
Yeah, and this is a really important subject that we're going to go into in more detail, I think, later on in the season. So, I totally agree with you. I think that presentation, public speaking really does fall a lot into the physical presence category. But in that specific example, I would say body language, right?
That's where I was going, definitely. Right. When you talked about physical presence, even outside the public speaking in the meeting, let's say it's you're physically attending the meeting, and so are the other people involved in the meeting.
Right.
When I think physical presence, I start thinking about, okay, the space, the literal space that I'm occupying, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
How much of this space am I taking physically,
right,
of where I am?
And how do you look in that space, right?
Yeah.
Are you shoulders back, open stance, or are you hunched in like this? Please don't talk to me, right?
Are you making yourself bigger, or are you
small?
making yourself smaller? Right.
Exactly.
That's like the number one I go to. Another thing that comes to mind with physical presence, again, we're still talking about, let's stick to the meetings, not go so much into public speaking, because I'm sure we'll have an actual separate conversation about that.
Yeah.
After that, it's just the physical presence is the awareness. How aware are you of how you feel in certain body positions? So something that I've started doing and recommend a lot of my clients to do as well is just take note, take stock of how you feel when you sit in certain ways or stand in certain ways. So that's another thing with a physical presence. How much space am I taking? What are my uncomfortable positions? For me, if I'm sitting down, it's, one leg over the other, usually my right leg over my left leg. And then I lean a little bit back into the chair. And that's me taking as much space as possible. And I'm just relaxed. I can instantly
But you're
feel
tall and
in how I breathe.
gangly, so
yeah. Gangly or lanky.
Gangly is another great word.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're lean and tall, and yes.
So
you take up a lot of room. Yeah.
I take up a lot of room. Yeah. So that's for me, the physical is that.
Okay.
Pop culture reference. When we talk about presence, being calm, focused, and in the moment, one famous character stands out. Mr. Spock from Star Trek. Not to be confused with the American Dr. Spock, who wrote books about raising children. Mr. Spock is the science officer on the Starship Enterprise. He's half human and half Vulcan. Vulcans are an alien race who believe emotions are dangerous. So Spock learned to control or suppress his human feelings. He watches, he listens, he waits, then he speaks.
Well, fascinating is a word I use for the unexpected.
Spock shows us what presence is. It means choosing your response, not reacting with emotion. And of course, Spock's most famous words, live long and prosper, is more than a goodbye. It's a wish for a good life. Star Trek gave us more than stories. It gave us language, ideas we still use today. Here are a few quotes you might know. These phrases are fun and can be used in a variety of situations, but they also remind us of something deeper. To be curious, to stay calm, and to choose how we respond. Pop culture reference.
Charismatic presence. Charismatic presence. It's like it's the aura, it's the energy of a person. We talked about gravitas earlier, but in terms of language learning, how's this something that you can develop?
Oof. Oh man. Yeah, oh, this is one is quite, I feel, a fairly complex one, right?
Hmm.
Because this usually comes as a result of working on the language for as long as you have, for a considerable amount of time, and you feeling more and more confident in that language.
Mm,
I mean, I'm thinking Thierry Henry, man. Thierry Henry is a good example of being charismatic in a language that isn't your own, you know.
right.
Thierry Henry, for maybe the two people who've never heard of that name, because come on, it's Thierry Henry. You know, you should,
Yeah, but not
like, come
everyone
on.
likes football, Ramps.
Yeah, but Thierry
You
Henry
you
is,
always relate everything to football when you can.
or
Some people just
rugby.
go, "Well, I don't do sports." There are many other interests in the world apart from sports.
A few moments later.
Can you believe this guy? Like many other interests in the world apart from sport. I mean, the only thing that might be just more interesting than sport is cinema, you know, like, but everything else. But
All right,
Thierry Henry,
why don't we use cinema?
cinema.
Use a
Okay.
movie star example.
Oh yeah. I mean, yep. If you can't use Thierry Henry, I mean, maybe Antonio Banderas, is a good example
Yeah,
of someone who is
who,
charismatic in a language that isn't his own,
yeah,
right?
a nice way to put it would be he oozes charisma. He
Ooh, ooh.
oozes charisma. Yeah.
Yes, of course, he's got the advantage of the accent, you know. So it's
Don't
it
do
helps,
accents.
you know.
Don't do it.
I'm not gonna do accents because I'm
Don't do
really bad at
accents.
the thin line between flattering someone and potentially
And insulting them. Yeah.
insulting them.
Yeah.
I'm coming to learn that.
Yeah.
Flirt with that line a lot. I've been told myself.
Yeah.
So
So
I
Antonio
think it's
Banderas, yes. Okay.
yeah, he's a good example.
Hmm.
I think yeah, I'm not sure. I'd actually
Okay.
bring this back to you. How
Yeah.
can you do it like in a
Well,
different language?
I think this is where the idea of being yourself in another language comes into play, right? This is
Yeah.
the charisma comes from feeling confident that you're expressing yourself in a way that is natural to you, even though it's in English or in another language, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you said, yeah, that comes from confidence. It comes from language acquisition. And in a lot of ways, it's also related to mindful presence, you know, clearing that inner critic, uh, not listening to the voice that says, oh, you're not good enough, your English is terrible, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And being able to move on from that. I think all three of these things, there is no one that is more important than the other. I think they all three work to help you find that inner confidence in speaking in any situation.
I think you also have to be really for the charismatic presence in a different language. You've I don't want to be dramatic now and say you've got to fall in love with the culture, you know, of
Right.
the language you're trying to learn. Um, but you certainly have to be quite an observer of the culture you're trying to learn.
Mhm.
Um, because it's in observing that you start to understand what is and what isn't okay in within the context of that culture, especially when it comes to things like humor. What are the things you can joke about with generally in this culture? What's accepted? What isn't
Mhm.
socially accepted? And I think that the charisma comes a lot from observing the people, the culture, the pop culture in relation to that language. You know, I know, you're gonna say Thierry Henry again, basta. I'm not even an Arsenal fan, if I'm just gonna be honest. Um, but even in his comedy, he knows exactly how to tune his comedy for an American audience and how to tune his comedy for an English audience.
Mhm.
And that's observation, observing not just the language itself, but the culture. You know,
Mhm.
of course, the language, or rather, the manner in which people use the language within the culture. So that just, as you were speaking, that just kind of came to mind. Like, yeah, why is it that I always go to Thierry Henry as a reference of a great person who speaks a second language very well? Almost, I would almost argue that almost at a bilingual level. He spent so much time in England, um, but that's one of the things that distinguish him, say, from maybe Antonio Banderas, who still has a very thick accent, maybe thicker
Thierry Henry
than
still has a
Thierry's.
very thick accent as well. And I think this is a good time to point out that accent doesn't matter in communication as long as you're
If
being
anything,
understood, right?
yeah. and some accents do have that je ne sais quoi. So if anything, just lean into it.
Right.
If you got like one of those accents that is naturally seen as very nice, just lean into those accents. I would even encourage you to do that.
Don't, but certainly don't. There's no shame in having an accent, I think is the point. You
Yeah,
mentioned earlier in Britain, there are 60 counties, there are 60 different accents. They all speak English in their own way based on where they are from. Um, it's still English. Okay, some accents are harder to understand than others, but everyone communicates. And it's
yeah,
the same when you're speaking English as a second language. Accents, there are very, very few people in the world who will be able to lose their native accent when speaking English because it's just the way your brain is programmed.
yeah.
And very, very, very few people will actually sound like a native speaker when they speak another language. And that's not just with English, that's whatever way you're learning. It's going to be very, very hard for me to sound Italian when speaking Italian because I'm English. That's just
Yeah,
because
that's the way it is.
unless you are truly bilingual, it,
Yeah,
it is almost impossible, I would say. So
that's just the way it is. Ding, ding,
maybe,
ding.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is. So those people are parrots. But yeah, I think that's what I'd add with charismatic presence. Is I think the people that I've seen that have it in different languages, it goes beyond the language itself. They've observed the language to an extent that they've almost assimilated some of the culture within
Mhm.
the way in which they speak. And as you said, they found themselves and they voice within the language,
Right.
within the confines of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable in that language.
Mhm.
There are one or two clients that obviously they're not celebrities, so we couldn't use them as an example. But I've worked with people before where I was like, okay, this person clearly lived in an English speaking country
Right.
because it's in what they say, it's in the inflection of certain words.
Mhm.
Um, it's certain phrases as well that you cannot have read that from a book or seen that in a film.
Right. Yeah,
You must
you've been
have
around a native speaker and you've heard
you've
that
been
phrase a lot of
oh, the
times
time
to pick up on the
exactly.
inflection. Yeah, yeah, agreed, agreed.
Exactly. Maybe they didn't live abroad, but within a circle of friends, they had a
Circle
close
of
relationship
friends
with
or
some.
yeah, exactly,
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly.
So
Okay.
that's what I would add with charisma. Like that,
Okay.
I think being a good observer of
Mm,
the culture,
definitely. Definitely.
culture.
And speaking of culture, how do you think culture shapes presence? Are different ideas about presence?
Ooh.
What
Oh
do you
man.
think?
Well, we can start with the physical. We're in Italy, right? And
Okay.
we know that would be a very important thing, I think, in Italy.
Hmm.
Physical presence, maybe because it's tied very closely to how you present yourself. That's how you dressed.
Right.
How do you smell? All
Yes.
of those things.
But
And
also
yeah,
the way that you communicate,
definitely, yeah, we
right?
speak about that a lot. Yeah,
Yeah,
the manner in
like
which
with
you
the
communicate.
gesticulation, just animation. Generally, your physical presence is very much related to the language and to communication and to culture.
Yeah,
Mm, definitely.
culture plays a big role. I think coming back, it's linked to what we were saying before, the observations, right? And this
Mm,
is, exactly how we got here. It plays a big role because understanding those little things helps you to maybe say something or do something that isn't going to be offensive. One thing that, and I think people that come from smaller countries, maybe we can relate this to a lot more than people who come from bigger countries. And when I say small, I'm not talking about in relation to that, physical size of the country, because South Africa by land mass is quite a big country, but smaller in the sense of the economy and global scale and that kind of stuff, geopolitics.
mhm.
Maybe when you are like English or American, it's different because you expect people to know so much about your country and your culture because, you one of the big decision makers in the world, I
Yeah,
suppose.
perhaps we forced it upon other countries for many hundreds of years, that kind of thing. Yeah,
It
yeah,
could be, yeah. It
yeah.
could be somehow related to that.
Cup
I
of
was told,
tea.
yeah, I was
Yeah,
told there's something like England went around the world and,
it's
um,
news to me. It's all history anyway. So,
traveling and asking people, do you have a flag?
Do you have a flag? Yeah.
Do you have a flag? And people come in to say, no, we don't have a flag. And they say, well, now you do.
Yeah. Well, then this is ours.
Pop culture reference.
And we built up empires. We stole countries. That's what you do. That's how you build an empire. We stole countries with the cunning use of flags. Yeah. You just sail around the world and stick a flag in. I claim India for Britain. And they go, you can't claim us. We live here. 500 million of us. Do you have a flag?
And so maybe you're not so surprised, but one thing with coming back to the culture element is people will usually appreciate it when you know something about their culture, the smallest to the biggest. So this element of presence in culture could be a nice way to actually build rapport and make yourself memorable or stand out. You know, I'm often surprised when people know something about South Africa that is beyond the apartheid, that is beyond Nelson Mandela. You know, after those two subjects, that's usually the first two things that people know. You know, they'll know Nelson Mandela, they'll know apartheid, and then, you know, I don't know why I'm saying it like that. Apartheid. You know, maybe I should say I'm saying apartheid so people can understand. But say apartheid. You know? But usually, if they know anything outside those two things, I'm usually impressed. You know, so I don't know if you can relate to that. You know, being English, but I know that when I'm speaking to mates who are come from, say, I don't know, Estonia, someone from Estonia, if you know something, they'll be surprised. I wanted to pick a European nation and not.
You make a very good point, and honestly, not something I considered. Like you say, I'm from London. I mean, you don't get much more UK than London. It's the place that everyone visits if they go to the UK. You know, if you said, "Oh, have you ever been to Stoke-on-Trent?" Most people would go, "What? Where?" You know,
I only know Stoke because of the football team.
Because of the football team, exactly. So most people would respond with football if they'd heard of it, because they were a Premier League team for a while. But if you say, you know, have you actually been there? Or Stratford-upon-Avon. This is the birthplace of Shakespeare, is Stratford. But everyone associates Shakespeare with London because of the Globe Theatre. But actually, he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, I should say, rather than Stratford, London. And so, yes, so for me, it's very easy. Everyone knows where I'm from. I can have conversations at ease about my hometown because I'm from the capital of the UK. But I'm pretty sure that if you're not from London or maybe Manchester, one of the bigger cities in England, you probably have the same experience. People will know about the country, but they won't necessarily know about where you're from. So yeah, I agree. I think that's a very important part of being present within a conversation with someone is to have an understanding of where they're from.
Today, we are in the San Babala and Duomo area of the centre of Milan. We are looking for non-native English speakers who would be willing to try to pronounce some difficult words. Let's see how they do. The first question is, what's your favourite word to say in English?
Laugh.
Laugh. Okay, nice. Yeah, good.
Cantankerous.
Oh, cantankerous is a good word. Very nice.
Mushroom.
Mushroom. Okay.
Yeah,
no.
That's a good pick. That's a good pick. That's a good pick. I think shirt.
What about a word that you find difficult to say in English?
Long words.
Yeah.
Okay. Or maybe when something is not regular pronunciation or phonetics.
Right.
Okay. Because Italian is a little bit different than English.
Just a little. Yeah. Just a little.
Just a little.
Yeah.
World.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
I don't know. A lot of them.
The ones that got TH, it's a problem to think.
Sounds,
a lot of people have problems with that.
To say, yes.
Okay, fantastic.
I guess like everything involving the schwa sound is kind of difficult. Yeah.
Okay, which is pretty much any word that has more than 3 syllables.
Yeah, I'd say that. Also, I think Spaniards, when we learn English, we don't quite get the. We tend to say de or there instead of the.
Yeah.
Schedule, I think. Sometimes I mispronounce it. When it's like in the past tense, I mispronounce it a lot.
Okay, so schedule is an interesting one because in America you use the ka
Yeah.
In England, we use the sh.
Exactly, yeah.
Schedule. Okay, fantastic.
Appreciations.
Okay. Appreciation.
Okay.
Is it like this?
Yeah. Appreciations.
Appreciation.
Very
good. All right.
I have to think about before say it.
There's lots of sounds. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we're going to start with our list.
Okay.
And so the first word is this one.
Okay. Presence.
Good. All right.
Presence.
Presence. Presence.
Presence. Presence.
Engaging.
Very good.
Engaging.
Engaging. Engaging.
Engaging. Engaging.
Engaging.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. That's great. Brilliant. That's it. That's all we need. Yeah. How do you think presence influences things like formality, personal space, directness, gestures? Because these are all things that are very different from culture to culture, right?
Definitely. I think I'll start with the personal space one, and then maybe I'll redirect some of the questions back to you because I'm curious as well. Personal space, big difference in cultures. Like when I first moved here, that's one of the first things that I noticed instantly. Now, I'm South African, right? And generally, personal space, I'd say what is regarded as my own personal space in social interactions or outside in the public, maybe it's about arm's length, if not a little bit more than that, you know. And that's pretty much it, you know, unless you find yourself in a packed place, people typically kind of will respect that kind of distance. And it's different here. So personal space is definitely some of the things that is different. I find that in Italy, maybe in the north of Italy is somewhat normal, but if you go to the south, that kind of decreases a lot more. Obviously, if you're interacting with someone from the south and you're in the north, it's going to be there. But yeah, that is a big one. That's it. Like, it took me a while to understand it, because it was a bit shocking that people came into literally what for me as a South African would be my personal space, or space that's reserved for people that I know intimately, you know, for lack of a better word, and not intimately as in wow, that intimately, but just not necessarily mom chicka wow intimate, you know, but intimate enough that we're friends.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is in terms of, I'm a Brit, right? I think the world has an understanding that in terms of personal space, British people have personal space. They come across as to some cultures as cold because they're not as forward with the touching and greeting, and it's not as much part. It is part of a culture, but it's, you know, if you're meeting someone for the first time, you don't do the double kiss or whatever. It's a handshake. It's like, hello, nice to meet you. You've got to build the trust before the personal space is invaded in some way.
I'm told that in Spain is even much more different than in Italy. You know, in Italy, you work up to the kiss anyway. You know, I remember right in the beginning when I just moved here, some of my then girlfriend's friends would kiss her and then would shake hands with me, and I was absolutely fine with that. And over time, I also gradually, graduated and earned the kiss. But I'm told in Spain,
I think you have to instigate as well. You have to say, look, I am comfortable if you're comfortable. Don't you think?
Yeah. I was comfortable with the handshake. I'm happy with the handshake for a while. It feels awkward for me if I'm doing the kiss with someone that I don't have that kind of relationship with.
Right.
So I'm only mentioning this because I was told that in Spain, or at least one person told me, a few people told me this, that maybe this may have been by association, because both of these friends who told me about this story, they were there visiting friends who live in Spain, and they introduced them to their friends who are, Spanish living in Spain. And maybe it is because they had a person in common, but they did the two kisses on the side. But yeah, that's how it becomes different from culture to culture, in that sense, that in one culture, you work up to that kissing on the cheek, whereas in other cultures, it appears as though maybe you just, right off the bat, you get the kiss on the cheek.
Yeah. And I think if you look at Asian cultures as well, it's even further in the other direction, there
How
is
so?
there's very little personal contact.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Even a handshake is as much as you're going to get, I think, but certainly in a in a business environment.
Yeah, you pointed out something. I'm thinking about Japanese people bow and there's space in between there.
There's a formality to it, isn't there? In southern Mediterranean Europe, there is a formality to a greeting, and how you achieve that, but it isn't anywhere. I think there's formalities within each culture, but there is also a scale of formality. And I think if you look at Asian cultures, particularly, they're much more formal in that sense, and public displays of affection of any kind are not as common as they are in Europe, certainly.
Yeah, in the West, definitely. So yeah, I think the culture does shape that a lot. People, the nice thing about it is that people are very quick to pick up on that, and just usually,
but that
when in Rome,
that's the presence aspect, isn't it? It's understanding, in the moment. Okay, what is appropriate in this situation? Yeah. Because in any culture, you're going to have a variety of introverts and extroverts, right? More often, extroverts are going to be more likely to offer the opportunity to have more close personal contact.
Yeah,
I would
or
say
ask questions. Or ask questions.
They're
Why isn't
build,
it this way?
They're going to build the rapport with you much quicker. So in those moments, if you're present and you understand who you're speaking to, it's more likely that you would have the opportunity, if that's something that you are comfortable with. Introverts are probably going to be slightly more reserved and will need more time. And I'm thinking from experience as an introvert, it's something that I struggle with at times. Is okay, what's the appropriate greeting, or how do I go about this? I'll feel I'll handshake,
Yeah.
So I think that having that awareness of the situation, of what the relationship is with the other person, what the cultural norm is, I think that's how it's all related to presence in the end.
And now it's time for Spot the Collie-cation.
Observation. You've got to be present to be able to observe anything. And in the beginning when you find yourself in a new setting of any sort, you observe so much before you even start to speak. Contrary to what most people might think, extroverts, we're quite observant. Actually, I haven't met an extrovert who wasn't quite observant. We're quite observant. It doesn't look like it, but we are.
Well, I suppose, extroverts spend so much more time socializing and being around other people that you just through exposure alone, you're going to observe so many more behaviors and understand people in another way.
Well, I don't think you can be an extrovert and not like people and spending time with people.
No.
And like most things, if you like something, you spend a lot of time studying it, observing it. And this is what I mean when I say, contrary to what many may believe, extroverts are quite observant, and therein we have our presence. You can't do one without the other. And part of observing, especially when it comes to the cultural element, is that we observe or compare from what it is that we already know and see if it works with what it is that we already know. So I'm South African. I'm a Black South African living in Italy. So one of the first few things I'm going to be doing when I first move here, firstly, I'm an extrovert, so I learn best probably by talking and communicating with people. But at the time, I don't speak the language. So the only thing that I can do in that moment in time is observe, right? And that's when I notice things like the personal space, gestures, directness of how people are, how people speak, tone of voice, right? And I'm starting to sort of associate these things that I'm picking up with this culture and trying to understand, okay, where does my style of communication fit within this? So again, this is the presence, right? Because I'm observing my information, the information in front of me, comparing it to what I already have and what I already know, and trying to find my space within, you know.
All right.
So
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
absolutely. I think observation is very important, and I think active listening is incredibly important as well. If you think about style of communication, um, as as a Brit, but I think generally with the north of Europe, uh, in terms of style of communication, we develop presence by actively listening to the person that is speaking to us, allowing them the chance to continue with what they're saying until they have finished or come to a natural break. And this is something that is very important, and it's something that's very cultural with Northern Europeans. Southern Europeans, there isn't the same restraint. There is a communication style which is kind of
Oh yeah, like
talking
yeah,
over the top of each other a lot more.
one of the things that, and this is I can relate to as a South African, and maybe more so as a Black South African, is there's something called pour parler, you know,
Okay.
pour parler, which basically means to talk just for the sake of talking,
Right.
Just because we're together and we're just chatting. From the sounds of it, I imagine it's got French origins, but
Si parler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oui, oui.
Mhm.
But I've come across it here in Italy, and I've learned that sometimes that's just what it is. People are talking for the sake of talking. They're not talking because they're looking for a solution. They're not talking because they necessarily just want to complain. They're not talking because there's a means to an end to this conversation. It's just talking because they just love to talk, you know?
Sure, but you know, we
Okay.
love to talk in the north of Europe as well. But you
Yeah.
let someone finish talking, you let someone finish their point or their idea or whatever it is, even if it's in general conversation, cutting people off or talking over the top of them is incredibly rude in the UK and in places like Germany and as well. And so
Fair.
it's a different style of communication,
Different
and
style of
having
communication.
the awareness of that type of communication is very important, I think.
Yes. No. I agree. I think it's very important. But you know, as you said, presence within the culture. So I've learned in those moments in Italy, right, when I'm having those conversations, a conversation like that, and there's almost like a constant interruption of everyone. By the way, not I'm not being the only person singled out being interrupted, because definitely it happens. I've learned in those conversations, I just take a backseat and just observe for the most part,
Mhm.
because it's a learning moment for me. This is usually when I pick up idiomatic expressions in
Mm.
Italian and things like that. Even maybe not even in Italian per se, but in dialect, because they will say one or two things in the regional dialect,
Mhm.
and they will speak with each other, and maybe people will, as you said, you know, to speak on top of each other, and it will be like the most natural thing. No one's going to get very angry about it. It's just
Sure.
this
Yeah,
is the way
but
that
if you're in a
people.
business meeting and
Yeah,
you are Southern European and you're in a business meeting with Northern Europeans and you keep going in like that, you know, just awareness wise, it's a different way that you might not get the response that you're looking for in those kind of situations,
I
right?
think it's fair to say. Yeah,
And if you're
I think it's
Northern
fair to say.
European speaking with Southern Europeans, you need to be aware that this happens. And you know, maybe if that goes against your particular style, your culture, like you say, observation, listening, and just allowing the process to happen
Still be present,
without
you know.
taking it
Don't not get
personally.
angry like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
lose the
exactly.
being present.
It's just the way of communicating. It's not
I,
it's not it's not because it's not a personal attack on you.
you know, it's actually quite. You just made me aware of something that maybe I wasn't as well attuned with and aware of. But I'm thinking of a friend of mine, James. Every single time we speak, every single time he interrupts me, he apologizes immediately after.
Mhm.
Like just Saturday, I was just like, yo, man, look, I appreciate it, but you know, it's okay. You know, it's a conversation. Clearly, in that moment in time, emotions are heightened. You really want to speak about this thing.
Mhm.
Or you've got this thought coming into mind and you simply must say that there and then. So yeah, I
Mhm.
didn't realize that. Yeah.
If British people particularly have to have something to say that's important, that it requires interrupting, there will always be a excuse me for interrupting, or I'm sorry, I just need to say something. They will always start with an apology because it is rude to interrupt people when they're in full flow in the UK. So we are programmed from an early age to use this language to make it clear that it's not in, well, we are intentionally stopping you, but we are sorry for having to do that.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that. I mean, I appreciate that about the culture. But yeah, that's definitely one of the things that make it difference, and how presence plays a role in it, being part of a conversation that's ever changing, ever evolving. You could argue this is the Southern European way. We start talking about wine and we end up, I don't know, discussing current affairs. It doesn't have to be this sort of thread that combines and connects one topic to the other, because sometimes people can be speaking, adding something on top of each other and taking the conversation in different directions.